Thanks everybody for putting your superpowers in the chat. It's good to see everybody and see all those locations. Yeah, sometimes superpowers do take some time to develop or to discover them. Thanks everyone. Just scrolling through where everybody's from, seeing those superpowers. Thank you everyone. So we're going to let some more people come in from the waiting room, and we will get started soon on talking about historical inquiry. So if you're just joining us, we've got that question there. What do you consider your teaching superpower? Superpowers and your locations. Love it. I'm seeing some themes in here about relationships and storytelling and joke telling. And inquiry. It's a good topic for this one. All right, everyone. So I'm going to go back to the first slide here, and we'll come back to that superpower slide in just a moment. So welcome to the OER Project Skills Clinic on Historical Inquiry. My name is Erin Cunningham, and I am a World History Project Origins teacher in suburban Chicago. I'm here in my classroom today. And I teach WHP Origins to ninth graders, and I've been teaching the course since about 2018. So it's been a work in progress kind of from the beginning. So we're going to go through historical inquiry today, and we'll have some time to chat and to learn and to talk and ask questions. So thanks everybody for coming along for this ride. So our agenda for today, we have a couple of things. So the first part is going to be a little bit of me talking and just kind of going through the OER approach to historical inquiry. And then after that, after like this sort of contextual conversation, we're going to get into some breakout rooms and look at some of the OER tools that get at inquiry. So you'll have some opportunity to be the student, and then also to approach the activity from the teacher perspective and thinking about intervention and modification. And then we'll also go through sourcing a little bit as well, and some of the sourcing tools coming from the OER project. And then we'll end with some tips for success. And again, thinking about like, how do you bring this conversation into your own practice? And, you know, how to get more support going forward and some of those next steps. So ultimately, that's what we're after today, is really focusing on historical inquiry and what that looks like from the student's perspective and from your perspective as the instructor. And then just some norms for our session tonight. You can, use the raising hand feature at any time if you have a question, a comment, whatever it is that you need, feel free to use that raise hand. You can use the chat too for that sort of purpose. And with me tonight, I've got Megan, and she's going to be monitoring that chat and working on that. Megan, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan. I'm a history teacher in New Jersey, and I also work with OER Project in professional development. And like Erin said, I'm here to help out in the chat and drop some links for you for resources and answer any questions you might have.
And Megan, too, just real quick, will the slide deck be shared in the community?
The recording will be shared.
Recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and with that too, if at any point you need to go live your life and not be on Zoom, you'll be able to pick up from this conversation at your leisure on the OER community. So if you need to leave for whatever reason, feel free to drop out. You won't offend us at all. We are all teachers and we all have things to do. And then, if your computer, if your Wi-Fi will allow it, we prefer having cameras on just to have that, face-to-face connection. And, just kind of being willing to put yourself out there and collaborate with other teachers. We're all here to engage in the OER project. So when we go to those breakout rooms, the more you can stay and collaborate, the better this will be for all of us. And again, yeah, your personal needs come first. So if you need to step out, please do. And, just make sure that this is something that is actually working for you and that you're getting what you need out of this experience. So that is what we're after today. And for those of you who are just joining us, as our little icebreaker, do now, we were sharing in the chat our teaching superpowers and name and location. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, you'd like to add that in now, go right ahead. And then we're going to get into what is historical inquiry. Thanks, everyone. Awesome. We have definitely people from all over, and I saw we have people from all over the world tonight, so that is awesome. Thank you, everybody. Awesome. Yeah, a lot of jokesters too. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. So historical inquiry. So I'm just going to start a little bit with like context. Just, before we get into the actual like practice of historical inquiry, it's important that we know what it is. And, just seeing from the chat, we've got first year teachers, we've got very experienced teachers, we've got everybody here. So let's just make sure we're starting on the same page. So historical inquiry from the OER project is the process of seeking truth or accurate information about events of the past. And this understanding and process, it's an ever-evolving thing. And so with your students, this is an important skill to practice because of all of the critical thinking that it's going to invoke, because of that analysis and evaluation, those upper Bloom's taxonomy type skills that we're always after. It's going to enable students to consider multiple perspectives. I know in the World History Project, one of our anchor pieces is the danger of a single story TED Talk. And so this idea of inquiry really gets after that idea. And it's also going to help students develop skills where they can defend their own reasoning and develop their own conclusions. And, in my school setting, that claim evidence reasoning skill set is so important. It's something that we're all really striving towards. So historical inquiry is something that's really going to help get at that sort of thing too. And one thing too, especially for those of you who are new, it's really important that you're patient with yourself. Getting to a place where you are doing historical inquiry all the time, all day, every day, it's going to take time to develop. And I know for myself too, and maybe some of you as well, like my experience as a history student was very much the sit and get variety, where you have that, teacher, that sage on the stage who is imparting their knowledge and they're telling you these stories and you're writing it down, and you're not necessarily in that sort of setting doing a whole lot of what we see here on the screen. And so this change in how we're approaching teaching history is something that definitely takes time to build in into your practice, whether you're new to the discipline or veteran. So that's what it is. So then our why. So why historical inquiry? So this is really the crux of what it means to be a historian. And it's really that methodology behind what a historian is doing. Doing history, that's historical inquiry. And so across the entire OER ecosystem, students are given the opportunity to frame problems for investigation, to make conjectures, to analyze and read primary sources and secondary sources, to assess claims, and to use evidence. So no matter what flavor of the OER project you're teaching, whether it's big history, whether it's AP, whether it's origins, or one of the other world history project offerings, your students have the opportunity to engage in historical inquiry across the board. And as John has pointed out too, that adjustment not only comes for us, it comes for students. And I don't know about you all, but I've also had parents who are completely baffled by the fact that we don't have a textbook, that their kids aren't bringing home a thick tome and writing outlines. So, you know, definitely this has been, historical inquiry isn't new, but I think it is new for a lot of our students and parents and schools too. So as far as the approach then, it's this like feedback loop that's happening between having that, you know, problem for investigation and going through evidence, drawing conclusions, coming back to the problem, and, you know, recycling through this, all of these different areas as you go through chronology of history and through different topics. And this is being repeated over and over again, so that you as the teacher are also, you know, developing your own mastery at guiding students through this, and then students are also developing their own mastery toward this approach. And, you know, I think at first too, for students, as we've, you know, pointed out, like students might resist this. They're maybe more used to just receiving information and it being transactional, whereas this is really putting them in a place where they're the ones who are the historians. They're the ones drawing conclusions with our facilitation. So the approach, and this is where I'm like now easing us into the part where you will soon be the student. So yeah, they are looking for the right answer and they get frustrated. I know my ninth graders definitely get frustrated at times when they just want to know, like, can you just tell me? Can you just tell me? And it's just not that simple. And so that's what we're gonna, you know, that's where we're gonna start in a moment with our breakout groups, is to put yourself in that position of being the student, and how it does feel a little uncomfy at times to have such an open-ended approach to learning history. So for the first step then, if we look at the part of that cycle where there's the problem, you've got to frame what it is that your students are investigating. So in this case, for example, how did transoceanic connections transform global economic systems and societies in different parts of the world? So this is coming from one of the WHP, the World History Project courses, specifically getting at like the Columbian Exchange. And, you know, this particular question is one of the key questions coming from the OER project, but this is also something that you can totally reframe and modify depending on your state standards, depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your students. So this is, you know, this is a starting place, but not necessarily where everybody, you know, you don't have to use what OER project says is the problem. And that's where step B comes into play, by reviewing your standards, making sure that this particular inquiry is what you need to do for your students in your particular setting. So then from there, you have the entire OER ecosystem at your behest. And so there's all kinds of different materials that you can draw from. And so using that search tool can be really helpful too. Like I primarily use my resources from WHP Origins, but from time to time, I'll draw materials from BHP. Sometimes I even pull something from AP. So, you know, there's all these different places where you can draw materials depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so then from there, you want to think about the concepts. And so that's like the middle section of our loop here, these practices for students. And this is where you're thinking about the lens or the perspective that you want students to be considering. So is this a cultural approach that you want students to be considering? Is it political? Is it social, economic? Is it the environment? So these are different themes of world history that you can use to direct students' perspective. And another approach too is that you can zoom in and look at a particular persona, and think about, different, and this is where, when you're in your small groups soon, this is kind of more the thing that you'll be looking at is for different personas, in different disciplines, like an archaeologist, an economist, a history teacher, all these different people, how might they approach this particular inquiry? And so from there, your question, that original question that we saw a couple slides back, might take on a slightly different look. So if you're looking at this from a civics perspective, then your new inquiry might be something along the lines of what role did political organizations play during the period of transoceanic connections? And so, these are just how then you might tweak that initial compelling question slightly based on the lens or the perspective that you want your students to take. And so all of this is really to say that the OER project materials are designed to be modified. They're designed to be transformed in the way that your students and you and your state standards require. So here's where you get to be the student. So we're going to do some practice. And Megan has shared in the chat. This is a resource from Big History Project. And what you and your small groups will be doing is taking a look at those discipline cards. And while this is a Big History Project resource, we're going to be thinking about kind of more of a world history event, the Columbian Exchange. So that's, as we've been going through those questions previously, this is that transoceanic exchange that starts happening after Columbus's voyage. So that exchange of plants and animals and people and ideas across the Atlantic. And in your small groups, then you are the student. So you are approaching this activity as if you are the student. And we'd like you to look at the Columbian Exchange through the lens of a historian, an economist, and a geographer. So in other words, if you were a historian, how would a historian view the Columbian Exchange? How would an economist view it? How would a geographer view it? And so we'll give you about 10 minutes to be in your small groups and to think about those three perspectives with the Columbian Exchange. And then in about 10 minutes, we'll come back together. So it would be helpful if you have a designated person in your group who can share with us what your group discussed as you went through this activity. What questions do you have me before we do that? Oh yeah, so the cards. Let me open them. So for these, you would as a teacher, and can people see my screen right now? Is it showing the discipline cards? No. Okay. Technical difficulties. Let me go back, or you know what? No, let me go forward. There it is. Okay. So for the discipline cards, these would be so you would have, like, for instance, in those circles, you would have like the person's title. So for us, it could be historian. So like historian, I study history. And then, the types of questions that a historian might ask, the resources that they might use, and the evidence that they might draw from. And that's also building upon this what do you know, what do you ask material as well that Megan also linked. And so, which is kind of more like, I think for this particular activity, the what do you know, what do you ask is more what we'd like you to focus on for this. Because for the object or event, that's going to be the Columbian Exchange. And then the three disciplines again are historian, economist, and geographer. Does that help with that? And Megan, if you want to jump in too.
Yeah, so I was just going to jump in and say I also dropped the discipline cards that are already filled out. So the blank ones are for additional, if you were in the classroom and adding in additional disciplines or jobs that you want students to develop questions and what types of resources and evidence that a discipline would use. But I did just drop in the discipline cards that are already done for you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back real quick to the instructions. So again, we're going to break into small groups, really focusing on more of the what do you know, what do you ask through those three lenses. And then make sure in your group that you've got someone who is ready to share with us all when we come back in about 10 minutes. All right, so the breakout rooms are there for you. And we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Breakout rooms are going to be closing up in about 20 seconds. Got just about everyone back. All right. I think we are all returned now to the main room. So welcome back. So I'm curious how being a student, doing some historical inquiry, how that went for you all. So well, Tiffany, I see your actual, there you go. There you go. All right. So Tiffany, talk to us. There you are.
Okay, now I'll put my hand down. We actually talked in our group how we were not great students for a bit because we were unsure at first for a little while and if we were supposed to be discussing modern historians or of the time. And we did end up coming to the conclusion that we probably should be modern. Found the example sheet and then the direction sheet as well, the third and fourth link, I think. So that was most of our discussion, though we did talk briefly about those job titles if you'd like me to go into that.
Yeah, feel free to share whatever. Yeah.
So we did talk about geography and how we could look at how it changed the whole world basically, and like crops and how crops were grown and what transferred really well from one side of the ocean to the other and what did not, and the movement of people. And as far as economists, how the money, the seeking of the wealth also changed how that evolved throughout the future. And that's kind of where we got.
Yeah, I think you sound like very good students. I think also, we're trying to do something new. I think going through the struggle as a student at the beginning and thinking like being able to anticipate those sorts of things like, oh, wait, do I want them to think about present day disciplines or do I want them to think about a historian at the time, someone documenting this in the 1500s. So I think, yeah, being able to anticipate that is really helpful, and that's going to help us too with the next breakout session. So thank you, Tiffany. Other rooms, what were you all talking about?
We kind of did the exact opposite. We placed ourselves in the time period and said, if you're
Uh-huh.
a historian and just found out about the discoveries of the Columbian Exchange, what kind of questions would that person be asking? And we focused in on, like what peoples are there and how are their civilizations organized? How are their governments structured? Things like that. Then we moved on to the economist, like what are the raw materials that are going to be available now? And then we went on to geography. And it's like how on earth am I going to map all this? And it's a completely different environment that I'm used to. So how are we going to build settlements when we don't even know what the climate is like here? So that was kind of our conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And I think too, there's sometimes with students, there's sometimes some power in being purposefully and intentionally vague, because then you end up with all of these other wonderful perspectives that maybe you didn't anticipate. So thanks. Other rooms, what were you talking about?
I'm not sure where the fancy hand is that
No worries.
my colleague had. So my group also meandered a bit through the cards, trying to kind of figure out why we were there. And we kind of got into a discussion of whether, for using this with students, would you give them the cards blank or partially filled in and have them sort of explore what the different jobs are within the disciplines? I thought it would be fun to give out all of the cards, so like the 9 pages worth of different jobs. And, what would a theologist think of this? Even though there's a pretty tenuous connection there, it would be interesting to see what the students, kind of came up with.
Absolutely.
Given those different roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like that every room has had a very different discussion about this activity. So thank you for that, Will. What else? What other rooms did we? I know we had more rooms.
I can speak for my room a little bit. So we sort of started with sort of debating whether we were going to tackle it as teachers first or tackle it as students, because the inclination is strong, I think, to go in it teacher mode.
Absolutely.
And so we talked a lot about, having to, as a student, putting ourselves into our student shoes, would they even know what some of these professions are? What the heck does an economist do? I mean, I barely know what they do. So, having to really sort of define that ahead of time. Otherwise, you might lose some of the potential depth of it that way. So that came up. We did come up with some questions as students, but I would say we struggled a little because it depends on your experience with these different professions. I would say I just had a conversation with a student about what a sociologist does. So, I think having some pre-teaching there would be good. Because that was a struggle for us as adults. So
thank you, Brittany. Yeah, and I think that's why for us in this particular skills workshop, being in that vulnerable place and reminding yourself what it is to be a student who's experiencing an activity for the first time. And there's definitely uneasiness when there's these big words, economist and geographer, that maybe you've never been exposed to, and feeling that sense of I just don't know. I think for us as teachers, where we're people who like to have the answer too, that having that little bit of vulnerability, I think it helps us also develop that empathy for our students, because inquiry is hard. It's higher level thinking, and we're asking a lot of our students. And so thinking from this perspective of the student, I think is going to help a lot too, as we go to the next part in a little bit about the teacher intervention. Other comments, thoughts too about this, like how it went for people feeling as a student?
So I can comment if it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So we kind of just brainstormed kind of what each group, each profession would do, and we kind of started seeing how the different professions intersect, right? So I think that might be a nice thing for students. And then also, here I'm riffing, I don't think we talked, but is that they really kind of help get at the frames, right? You know, like in a lot of ways. And then as a third observation just now is I think these would be great inquiry questions for kids to like supporting questions for kids to use when they do, as they go on in their inquiry. Right? So I mean, kind of working on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you mentioned the frames, you're talking about the WHP, the production and distribution. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that idea of categorization. And I think, you know, whether you are using WHP and the frames, that's one approach to thinking about this categorically, but also you can think about it, you know, if you're doing AP, you might be using Persia with the political, economic, religious, all that, or some other categorization tool that absolutely you could totally bring that into this as well, depending on your goals. Other thoughts or comments about this, especially, you know, thinking about this from the student perspective.
It was brought up in our group, it was brought up in our group that like the kids, it would be easier for them to see themselves in those positions in the future. Like somebody's got to eventually take these kind of jobs. So it shows them like, oh, this person would do this. So I just wanted to mention that was definitely not my idea, but I thought that there was a lot of validity to that.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, and you saying that I use from Big History Project. I don't know if other people have used this, but the Mystery of the Headless Romans activity. It's pretty early on, and it's an activity that it brings in this idea of disciplines. And I've definitely, to what you were saying, Ashley, like I've had students who walk away from that activity like, I want to be a forensic scientist. You know, like the pottery expert also. I think so many kids are like, you can do that? You can get paid to be a pottery expert? What? Like they walk away, I think, with some ideas 100% about career, and that there are all these different avenues that it's not just historian or history teacher if you are interested in studying world history. In the lesson, it's the mystery of the headless Romans. So there's a video clip that you show, and it's is it Timeline or Time? It's from a BBC produced show, and it kind of walks kids through the process. There's these headless Romans discovered under someone's patio in England, and they walk kids through the whole process of like figuring out who these people were. And yeah, they really, really like it. And it's a great starting point for the school year, regardless of which course you teach. Because I think it really just shows kids the interdisciplinary nature of history, and that like there's science involved, and it's really following the scientific method, that you have a conjecture. I mean, it's exactly what we're talking about, this inquiry. So yeah, awesome. Any other final thoughts about the student perspective? Okay, I'm trying to give my teacher wait time. So what I want to focus on next then is coming to that teacher lens. So thinking about, a lot of the concerns that people have brought up, that's what I want to devote the next breakout session to. And so, thinking about your experience with the what do you know, what do you ask activity, thinking about, for your particular situation in your particular course, your students, what would you maybe need to do to provide support for students as they would do that? So, and some of this we've addressed, telling kids what an economist is, stuff like that, and also thinking about that idea of like the gradual release, up front, you're going to be very direct with students and very like, that direct instruction sort of approach. But at what point and in what way do you kind of pull back on your direct involvement in an activity like this? So we're going to break into groups again, this time, probably more like 7 minutes. And again, if you can, choose someone to be your spokesperson, and it doesn't have to just be the spokesperson talking. When we come back together, everybody's welcome to share. But just, it'd be nice to hear from at least one person from every room. So we're thinking really about the teacher perspective now. How would you make this work in your classroom? All right, so rooms are there, and we'll see you in about 7 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. We'll have everyone back here in about 25 seconds.
You guys got any good jokes?
I know everybody said they were jokesters, so yeah. All right, well, there goes my timer. So we are good to go. All right, so Terry, you seem to have your hand raised already. So talk to us about your group.
Yeah, our group, what was really interesting, and we had somebody from Arizona and Maine, and then from the Midwest, I'm from Minneapolis, and we had someone from Cleveland. And one of the teachers is teaching students dropout. I think it was dropouts. I want to make sure I'm saying that respectfully and whatever. So they're in and out. And so I was saying we want to build on their experience because they're bringing a different life experience to it. And so then we talked about how we would, what is the hook? And so then eventually we came to food is a hook because everyone eats and everyone enjoys it, especially young people. And that's a way to get them to see the benefit of what we're talking about and take it off from that point. We also talked about modeling, whatever it is that we wanted, and then doing pre-teaching so that the ideas are not too foreign to them so they can comprehend what's being asked.
Absolutely. I love it. I love the idea of a hook. Absolutely meeting students where they're at. And so many people at the start of this session were commenting on their relationships with students as their superpower. And so knowing, is it food? Is it music? Is it pop culture? Yeah. What is that? What is that thing that's going to draw them in? Absolutely. Thank you, Terry, for sharing that. Other people, what was your
Well, if
discussion?
I can
go ahead, Russell. Yeah.
From our group, we talked about how intentionally vague this lesson is, and the majority of our student populations would need a lot of scaffolding to get to these places. So how we might present it is on one day have them fill out the what do you know about this, and then do some teaching on it, and then later return to it and say what questions do you need to ask, or what information do you need to find out, and how would you ask those questions. We talked about providing them with maybe, this wasn't the exact wording, but sentence stems to get their questions started, because they wouldn't know what the jobs are. They would have to be given information and time to work with material from that profession to see how those people would ask questions. So basically, it would be a long process to get them to the stage where they are asking the questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point that doing this with students is a work of patience, and definitely meeting kids where they are, and breaking it down into its parts. With the materials, it's really important that as much as we want to do it all at once and get it right there from the start, we got to go piece by piece, and really help students so that eventually, maybe by the end of the year, maybe the following year, there's a level of independence. And I need to turn on my power strip. I'm almost out of power. There we go. I was like, why is my computer screen dark? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. There's, your students better than anyone else. So just making sure that these materials are personalized to you and your style and what your students need. Absolutely. Thanks, Russell. Other responses to this, other comments?
In our group, we were talking about the different levels. Like, for example, somebody taught honors history. The other lady, she was teaching middle school, and I teach ESL students. They're learning English to the content. So I teach them history, and I have all grade levels. I sometimes have 6th through 12th grade in my class, because they're placed there by language levels. So I learned from, I believe Jeff was his name, that I had not gone much into OER, but that there are Lexile levels that I could choose and set like if I want to give them primary sources on something, I can set the Lexile levels to a level where they're able to understand. Because as I was telling them, I have to provide them with a lot of background information, and they have to do a lot of they know what a historian is, obviously, in their language, and it's easy to make the association, but then later on, it's the formulation of the questions as to, okay, you're trying now to ask a question in another language becomes the issue, right? So that's what we were talking about in our group.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think, seeing these, we're all really coming from all these different teaching environments. And so the Lexile thing is really important. You can also, and Megan, you can maybe help me on this, but I think most, if not all, the materials can also be translated into Spanish or are available in Spanish as well. So that's another way to modify and adapt for student needs. And yeah, absolutely. And I think too, something like, for instance, I was doing continuity and change over time with my 9th graders today. And I really wanted to get at the skill of continuity versus change. So for their first introduction to that particular skill, instead of them generating the list of continuities and changes, I provided a bunch of things, and then it was up to them to categorize. So those little tweaks that you can do to maybe take some of the intellectual load off of your students, and like, what is it that you are really trying to test here? Like, which piece of this is it? The question asking, and thinking about, if it's really question asking that I'm after, then maybe I really need to backfill and just tell them what an economist is. And maybe give them those stems and take some of that load off so that they can really practice the thing that you want them to be practicing. Thank you. Other comments, thoughts, questions that came from this last breakout session?
Just very quickly, because mostly it's kind of a corroboration or a building on what other people have already said. So with students in general, giving them background on like jobs they may not know, like offering up sort of some Q&A opportunities, like, is there something in this list that you don't recognize?
Yeah.
Kind of breaking the kids out of the mindset of like finding the correct answer. So being able to like have a discourse without it necessarily ending somewhere, super, super satisfying.
Sure.
And just, making it accessible, in the ways that, different students have different needs with this. So modifying, the cards to maybe have fewer jobs on it so that it's less confusing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that what you modify for students in the very beginning when you're introducing this is going to be different than what you do a couple weeks, a couple months down the road too. Absolutely. That this is an ever evolving process. Thank you.
So I've got to get my freshmen. I'm the honors world with the freshman guy, and I need to get them ready to write at the AP level. So we do a lot of DBQ prep. So I could use, there's the historical themes at the AP writing, and then use the jobs that go along with it. So here's governance, here's economics, here's, sociology, and then have some of the documents and have the kids say, okay, which of these experts would like to see that document? And then actually have them putting them into the actual buckets is just an easier way to introduce them to it, and then getting them both primary and secondary information. And then also like allowing them then to read a document, and maybe that document will get them thinking of additional questions now that they've learned something new. So I'm definitely going to be using these cards for like next year when I start all over again, getting them started on the themes, the historical themes at the AP writing level.
Absolutely. And I think too with the AP stuff, this is also like thinking about point of view and thinking about purpose and audience. I feel like there's a connection too with that when you're having them analyze documents. Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And then Linda has in the chat, perhaps correlate the SPICE tool, and the SPICE is a categorization tool. Idea with the job title and have stations for that in groups, explore a topic. Yeah, absolutely. And I think something like this too is very that jigsaw kind of thing. You could give absolutely like what Linda's saying, you could give different groups of students different roles and go from there for sure. Other thoughts, comments, questions as you think about the disciplines?
Well, I think something that came up, I brought it up in my group, so I'll just but I think we all were kind of agreeing that this was a good thing to do, is that a lot of this system depends on being able to ask good, meaningful questions. And so much like the career paths that you're bringing up, I think the first thing before you even get to the career paths is to maybe do like a lesson or maybe two to get them thinking about what actually is a component of a meaningful, deep question. Because otherwise it's not going to really show them how you could use that question to pull yourself forward in that way. So.
And I think, yeah, Brittany, to your point, I think as teachers who ask questions for a living, we sometimes forget how hard it is to develop that as a skill. And, the number of times I have students ask me, did you get the thing? Like,
yes.
Yeah, right. We've all gotten that
all
question
the time.
at one point. So yeah, I think, and it's also a skill that is so useful in so many different settings. So yeah, I think it's, being able to develop that with our students, and then that they can do it from multiple perspectives. I mean, that's really, really major work that we're doing. Absolutely. Go ahead, Carrie.
I'm really kind of fixated on food here, but what I was thinking is, if our group, I was in the group that talked about using food as the entree, but no pun intended, but there's a joke for you. But anyway, wrapping it around to do that World Zone Cafe activity that as kind of the final product. So you've got some continuity there through the lesson. Might be a fun way to almost pre and post assessment of what the students studied.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a celebration too, food, celebratory. Absolutely. It's a reward. Yeah. And it connects in with, they did the hard work. Let's enjoy. I like it. Yeah. And the World Zone Cafe is a wonderful activity in the WHP materials that is part of the Columbian Exchange lessons. Yeah. It's a fun one for sure. And while I'm thinking of it too, the Headless Romans activity is actually called History as Mystery. So I've got it here in the chat too. Again, the video is called The Mystery of the Headless Romans. The activity is History as Mystery. Gets into the disciplines as well. It's a nice introductory. Kids really, they walk around, they're into it. They like it. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Well, thanks everyone. I want to then move us to the next part then of the inquiry cycle and talk a little bit then about, sourcing, the sourcing tool and the feedback form that goes with it. So this gets at the part of the cycle where we're looking at evidence. And if you'd like to see this closer up, Megan, just put it in the chat for you as well. And this, for those of you who have been with the OER project for a while, this is the updated version. This is the quick sourcing tool that you'll see here. And you'll see too, for those of you who are AP teachers, that there's definitely some overlap here with how AP goes about with sourcing. And just like everything that OER puts out, this is something that is intended to be modified. You can certainly give it to your students as it stands, but you can also think about how you would want to use this and what you would modify for your students. So like for example, for myself, sometimes, especially with my freshmen, I'm not going to have them look at all parts of the historical context, audience, point of view, purpose at once. I might direct them toward a certain one, like we are working on audience today. Or I might have them choose one that they feel applies in the situation. So, and there's also other questions too that you can always add, that, maybe there's a sub question that's going to help them get at the historical context, some guiding question that's going to get them closer to what it is that you're looking for them to get. So these are purely templates. They're meant to be modified. They're meant to be adapted. They are meant to be personalized so that they make sense for you and your students. I'm just curious, has anyone out there do you have experience using the quick sourcing or sourcing tools? Any other?
I've been looking at it, but I haven't dived in. Last year, I tried the sourcing tool and I went all in with the whole thing, and it was too overwhelming for the students and for me, I think. Yeah. And so I like the update and the quick sourcing, and I really like your suggestion of just breaking it down into like, let's try one of these and figure that out before hitting them with all of them.
Yeah. And I'll say, even I also teach AP European history, and I would say even for my AP Euro students, we can't do all of them at the beginning either. They're sophomores, so it's you got to build them up absolutely before they can really get to that independent level. And I think too, sometimes it's great to just like put it in front of kids and see what happens. You might get results you didn't expect. It might be a disaster. But it also might not be. And I think sometimes being, that risk-taking teacher who just is like, I just want to see what happens. We're going to have an experiment and see what goes, what happens, that can also be really interesting. And it also brings your students into that position of kind of being part of the teaching process too. Like, I'm giving this feedback to my teacher about what I need to be successful. I'm just curious if anyone else has tried out either the quick sourcing or the original sourcing tool.
I can't find the hand either, so I'll use this one.
That's all right. That's totally fine. We'll be informal here. No worries.
Okay. I used something similar when I was trying to teach college kids, actually, first year college kids, about determining the difference between fact and fake news. And we used different articles from different sources, and they had to look into them, and each kid got a different article, just one article to read, and some of them were from true scientists and others were fake news, made up stuff, conspiracy theorists. And then they had to go through and try to answer these similar questions and then have a group discussion about it. It was very, very stimulating, but yeah, you have to do, it's a kind of a multi-class effort.
Absolutely.
But teaching them how to read things that they see on the internet and determining the difference between, is this a reliable source or is this guy crazy?
Well, and I think you bring up a good point too, that this is not something that just lives in the history classroom. This is something that, eventually you want your students to walk away to a point where they're internalizing this. And yeah, like you said, absolutely evaluating sources on their own out in the wild. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Any other questions, thoughts about this particular tool?
I've been using the happy piece, and I find the the historical context, is kind of like where you're going with everything. But then so H is nice to have the happy acronym. But the audience, like for example, we're just teaching today, ironically, the Columbian Exchange, and we had Portuguese textbook from 1994. And in that certain textbook, it was what they were using in 1994 to tell young Portuguese students about the Columbian Exchange, with the rationale that the African person was stronger. And that was why they were chosen, as opposed to the whole, let's just zoom out and look at, is enslaving people something we want to be doing in the first place, right? So it was really interesting to think about audience, which is part of that happy tool in that context, versus the captain of the ship and his point of view that he was losing money. So we had multiple sources, and the students then chose the element of the happy, but really the element of the APP that they wanted to use. And I definitely think streamlining it, yeah, it's too much at once on one sheet. I just teach it like, and I'm in New York, so the question is, who is the audience? What is the point of view? What was the purpose? So not that I teach to the regions, but it's a region exam, and it's really nice that the happy tool focuses on those particular elements as well. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, that brings up the point that this can be, as you said before, can be used in multiple disciplines or whatever, because this is so useful when you're talking about writing a piece or an essay and also giving a speech, because you have to do the okay, you've got your context and your audience and your point of view, and what point of view are you coming from, and you really have to learn your audience and who are you talking to.
Yeah, this is as useful for the consumer of information as it is for the producer. What is your context? What is your setting that you're giving this presentation in? Absolutely. That's a really good point. That I think sometimes too, when I've asked students to create things, like, yeah, you do have to take that step back and remind kids, like, this is going to be published to your classmates. Like, what do you want them to see? Your spelling errors? Do you want them to see that you didn't finish it? That sort of thing. Like, that's, yeah, absolutely. your audience. This is great. Any other thoughts, comments? I see in the chat. Yeah, and I thank you for that in the chat too. So yeah, you can also, especially if you're thinking about AP, that outside evidence is one of the components of the rubric. So, you know, what else could you add to this conversation of this source that would be able to, you know, that you'd be able to incorporate into your DBQ to get that outside evidence point? Thank you. All right, so the other piece of this, and this is if we think about our cycle, now we're getting at the conclusions. So this is where then students are developing claims, and they've gone through different pieces of evidence. They've thought about the disciplines and the concepts. They've, you know, we started with that compelling question. And so students then are reviewing that initial question. Yeah, so they've gone through all this, and now they need to construct a claim and do that CER, the claim evidence reasoning process. And so Megan just put into the chat another relatively new tool, and this is a feedback form. And if you want to take a look at that, it shows you the different components. You'll see on there again, like the happy components. And then the last part is the historical accuracy. So, you know, students might, sure, they're getting at an audience, or sure, they're getting at historical context, but is what they're saying actually historically accurate? Like that piece of accuracy is important. And again, I don't want to, you know, sound like I'm being really repetitive, but this is not necessarily intended that you want students to do all of these things at once. This feedback form, you might just be using that top row of historical context. And your goal might just be that second one, historical context is described. Like that might be what you're shooting for, that kids have described context. And so, you know, they might not necessarily be at a point where analysis is really going to happen. So for you on your, like using this feedback form, you are the one setting the goals and what you think is appropriate for students, given your standards and given like where they are in this process. So, you know, audience is described is the starting place that you want everybody in your classroom to be able to at least give a description of an audience. So, you know, I think these tools sometimes do look like, oh, that's a lot at once. And so, you know, definitely using like the little snip tool and just taking what you need or whiting out what you don't need, or, you know, retooling this in a way that works best for you. And this one is definitely much newer. I don't know. And all of the OER skills have a feedback form like this now. And so to the question in the chat about exemplars, I know there are definitely exemplars now for the DBQs and the investigations. I don't actually, other OER people, are there exemplars of, say, a student, you know, showing audiences described or a brief explanation? Okay. So Megan put there's not yet exemplars for these, because this is a very new tool. And that also, I would say too, if you are looking for exemplars, the community, the OER community would be a great place to ask for those. And yeah, these templates do have the Google version, the Google Doc for, so that you can definitely, you know, copy and paste what you need. And I'm just trying to make sure in the chat. Oh yeah, and then there's a comment in here about the global context, and then the little c context. And I think too, there are activities in World History Project that talk about like the broad and the narrow. And that's broad as in terms of like time as well as geography, and narrow scope like temporal as well as spatial. Awesome. So with this, we're going to end here with kind of our next steps. Where do we go from here? So just, tips for success. There it is again, modify the documents whenever possible. So, what OER puts on the website is kind of like the most expansive version. And then you can, take from it what works for you. And that goes for everything about OER. There's way more materials on the website than anyone could ever possibly teach. And it's all there so that, you can select and you can use and you can personalize to the needs of your students and the standards you're trying to meet and all of that. And this was something that you all had discussed, the idea of modeling, and, being kind of doing a think aloud sort of thing with your students and showing them how you would approach this and showing them like you as the model student, what does it look like when I'm doing this successfully? And then, thinking about those multiple perspectives, which is such a key point of all of the different flavors of the OER project. And, really thinking about the idea of history as mystery, whether you're looking at headless Romans or you're looking at the Columbian Exchange, whatever the topic might be, really thinking about, how do I engage students and help them think that history is this ever evolving thing, that they can be the historian, they can be the one to discover something or look at something from a new perspective, that their perspective on history matters. And then, comparing and highlighting societal changes and being able to make those across time and place comparisons. And then finally, having students in the driver's seat, really going to get you that engagement, even if you have to give them food to make it happen, we'll do whatever it takes. And, I'm curious too, we have just a couple minutes left here. Any other last thoughts? I don't want to belabor anything either. We're getting to the end of time. But this conversation is not over. So we can continue on in the online community. So when you log into your OER project website, at the top, there's that community button, and that will take you to different forums. It also takes you into different professional development events like this one, planning resources, video library. There's all kinds of resources in there. And so as long as you have an OER project account already, which you do because you're here, you have access to the community and you can, tag me. And to tag someone, you just do the little @ and then Erin Cunningham. You can tag anyone who's here in our discussion today. So if there's a conversation that you started today and you want to get more details from that person, feel free to start a thread and continue talking about this. And Megan has also linked there. When you click on that, it's going to take you to the community in this particular sessions has its own thread started. So, feel free to continue the conversation there. And this is a place, for people looking for exemplars or looking for, this is my group of students. I want to try whatever activity. How do I do it? And I guarantee you will get responses same day, for sure. Sometimes within minutes. So it's transformed my teaching to have access to all of you and to have these conversations regularly with teachers from all over. So thank you. I've learned a lot. And I'd love to continue on with that. And yeah, and so there's other skill sessions coming up. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thank you all. This was great. And I'll be sticking around here too. So if anyone has questions or wants to, just follow up on something, I'll be hanging out here. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your days. It is pitch black outside here in Chicago, so that'll be fun. But have a great night. It's nice to see
Thank
you all.
you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.